Hi, again, if you're watching this, you probably know who I am. But if you don't, my name is Brendan. I used to be a pastor, and then I stopped believing, so I stopped being a pastor. And I want to answer some questions that I get from a lot of people all the time over the last 6 months. But specifically, somebody that I used to go to church with sent me like a list of questions that they wanted answered. So I'm going to answer the first question on their list. And the first question on their list was, how long were you a Christian for? And I was a Christian for 16 years. Half of my life and all of my adult life. I first started going to church right before I turned 18. I became a Christian around that time, and I left the faith when I was 36. And so right before I became 18, and then 18 years later, I stopped believing. And I became a Christian because I was invited to church one day by a girl that I liked, and then I realized that there were lots of girls at church, and I was 17, so that was kind of an important thing for me. And but we went on this retreat. It was the senior retreat. We went to Joshua Tree National Forest, or Park, because it's not a forest since it's desert. And we were going through this book called My Heart Cries Home. It was like a book. It was more of a booklet, if you will. And I was told at that time by the youth pastor, who's a great guy, that prayer is just like talking to God. And if you have things that you want to talk about, you could talk to him about God, and that he'll respond, he'll answer, and he might even solve your problem. So one day, I think it was like the last day of the trip, perhaps, we all went to our separate places to pray. And I'd never really prayed before, like on a kind of one-to-one level, so to speak, in an interpersonal communication level. So I decided that I should probably do that, since everybody else was doing that, and everybody else seems to think that that's the thing to do. And I was open to the idea of God. I don't know if I really believed or disbelieved in God, but I was open to the idea. So I sat down on a huge boulder in the middle of the California high desert, and I asked God what I should do. And this is kind of embarrassing. And I never talked about this much when I was a Christian because it was embarrassing, but I'll talk about it now. I asked what I should do. I asked God what I should do with the girl that I liked. So she was kind of in between boyfriends at the time, and I wanted to be the next one. And I was sitting there on the rock, and I prayed, and I said the words, okay, God, so I'm supposed to talk to you or something, so what am I supposed to do with this girl? And I didn't know what else. I mean, first world problems, right? Well, I guess everyone has that kind of problems, and they have throughout all time. But on that rock, I felt like I heard something. And by heard, I don't mean audibly. It was more of an otherworldly kind of thing. It was not something I was familiar with. And I felt like I got like an answer. And an answer was patience. Just be patient. And I didn't hear anything, but I just felt like maybe God was speaking supernaturally in some sort of weird way. And so it was kind of like this very first spiritual encounter that I've ever really had. Well, not ever really had, but that's a long story. But it was this kind of spiritual encounter with God, anyways, that I'd never had. And so then I thought that there was something to this Jesus thing, and to this prayer thing, and to this Bible thing. And so I stopped going to church at that point because of the girls that were there. Although, I mean, that was still an added bonus, let's be honest. But I was more going for me, and it was more trying to figure out who this God was, and what this prayer thing was about, and what this weird book called the Bible was. So I started reading a Bible. My youth pastor brought a Bible for me one day, and I started reading it because I thought that that's what Christians were supposed to do. You were supposed to read the Bible. Little did I know that most Christians don't read the Bible. Let's just be honest for a second. And I opened up because I wanted to find out about this Jesus guy. Like, who's this Jesus guy? I've heard a lot about him. Apparently his middle name is Hubert or something. Last name Christ. And when I was going through the Gospels, I went through the Sermon on the Mount. And I was kind of impressed with Jesus' teachings. And I was predisposed to be impressed with his teachings because I already knew who Gandhi was, and I already knew who Martin Luther King was. And clearly those two people drew their strength and perspective from understanding the same things that Jesus understood. So I was just really impressed, and I thought this Jesus guy had it all worked out. I thought he was smart. I thought he had something that I didn't understand. And so I just kept devouring more and more and more of the Bible to learn more and more things. And I had a lot of questions. And I had a lot of doubts. I mean, when you come to the faith after not going to church at all when you're 18 years old, and you've already received a pretty decent education, things just don't add up, right? Evolution question obviously doesn't add up. I remember the first time a youth pastor talked about hell. It didn't add up to me at first, and so I would question it and I'd wrestle with it, and I became good friends with people that were in ministry that would teach the Bible because I'd always want to know more, and I always had a ton of questions, and that would propel me later to start sharing the things that I learned from these people, and I'd share it to other people, and apparently I was pretty good at that. And so when I graduated college, I went to seminary, ran out of money for seminary because seminary is really expensive, moved up here to Linden, became a youth pastor in 2005, and then in 2010 I became the senior pastor of my church at the ripe old age of almost 31. Or was I almost 30? One of those two. Almost 31. And then in 2015, I stepped away from the church and the faith. And so that was my Christian story. I guess that was kind of the progress that I had. And so that's how long I was a Christian. And part of the reason why I want to answer that question is because I know a lot of times when somebody leaves the faith or somebody who was a Christian becomes an atheist, then there's that, well, were they ever really a Christian to begin with kind of a thing. And I mean, I used to think that way. I did. But I think it's really condescending, and it's very painful to the person who really, really did believe and then really, really doesn't anymore. It just, because that's a very painful process to go from one to the other. And when someone dismisses it and being like, well, were you ever really a Christian? Or obviously you were never a Christian. It's just a very cold thing to say. And the people that would say those kinds of things, they don't care. But if you want to be kind to somebody, when you hear somebody say those words, stop them. I mean, if you're a Christian, stop them. And I can understand why people believe that people never were Christians if they're atheists now. I mean, there's biblical evidence for that. I mean, if you believe the Bible. But then there's biblical evidence the other way as well, that people can genuinely believe and then genuinely leave. And so that was certainly my case. I mean, I really genuinely believed a lot. And then I really genuinely stopped. So, anyways, I'll answer another question in another video.